Is Bernie Sanders actually underrated in the 2020 primary? Huawei gets another stay of execution. Facebook wants to officially get into the news business. What could possibly go wrong? I'm Sagar Rangetti in for Jamal Simmons, and this is Why You Should Care. Is it fair to call a frontrunner underestimated? In the case of the 2020 Democratic primary, some argue yes. Senator Bernie Sanders has been a solid second-place frontrunner since former Vice President Joe Biden entered the presidential race back in April. But lately, Sanders has been seen by some as outshined by another 2020 contender, Senator Elizabeth Warren. Some recent polls suggest that you might not want to count Bernie out just yet. A new Morning Consult survey found Biden leads at 31% nationally, but Sanders stands firmly in second place at 20%, followed by Warren at 15%. And a recent CNN SSRS poll says that Biden stands at 29%, followed by Sanders at 15% and Warren at 14%. But polls are just one part of the story. Let's look at fundraising. According to a report from The Hill, Sanders has raised more than any other candidate this year and is on track to become the first candidate to reach the 1 million donor mark. And a recent New York Times analysis found that Sanders donors are far more geographically diverse than any other candidate. So, why should you care? If you're a fan of Sanders, this spells good news. Critics have long argued that Bernie's brand of progressive politics, including his embrace of the Democratic Socialist label, would scare away moderate voters, making Trump's second term a definite. The Sanders team rejects that narrative. A recent Fox News poll shows Sanders ahead of President Trump in a 2020 head-to-head matchup, but supporters of the president might see this as good news too. A recent Gallup poll found that less than half of Americans would vote for a socialist candidate for president. It's still a long road ahead to 2020, so we're going to have our eyes on the campaign trail. In the run-up to more China tariffs, controversial Chinese tech behemoth Huawei has been granted a bit of a reprieve. The Commerce Department announced this week that it will extend Huawei's temporary license that allows it to do business with American firms, despite the ongoing trade war. The company's initial 90-day reprieve from trade restrictions was granted in May, but was set to expire at the start of this week. Huawei is the world's #1 telecom supplier, and giving it a new temporary license to trade into November allows companies like Google to continue working with the tech giant. Since Huawei needs Google for access to the Android operating system that powers their company's smartphone, a forced split between the two would be a big problem for both companies. And Huawei is hoping to debut a new phone that would have been Google-based. I asked cybersecurity expert Nate Snyder about the issue, and he used the Hong Kong protests as an example of what China is capable of.
Facebook, I think, and Twitter took down a lot of content that was actually connected with the Chinese government because they were trying to push a disinformation campaign, various things like deepfakes and targeting people through data and their profiles and cracking down on the protesters in Hong Kong. So they were using the data and network against people, and it's in a state-sponsored way. So you're talking almost infinite resources to go after folks.
So why should you care? Well, you just heard part of the reason. I hope it's not the case, but President Trump could soften his touch on China trade by offering Huawei as part of a larger deal in the trade war. But here's the deal. We really can't let the infrastructure that Huawei is pushing into our economy, especially with ever-expanding 5G technologies. And since Huawei is controlled by the Chinese government, any business it conducts in the U.S. could have a huge impact on how we share both information and intelligence with our allies, but not to mention how average Americans access their own data. According to Nate, if we allow this, China will no longer have to go through a third-party application to access our data. Instead, the world's most sophisticated dictatorship and a surveillance state will have direct access to all of it. And if that doesn't make you care, I'm not sure what will. According to a 2018 Pew Research survey, 43% of American adults get their news from Facebook. It was at least 22 percentage points above other social platforms like YouTube, Twitter, and Instagram. Armed with that knowledge, Facebook is pitching a new media initiative to be your primary go-to for news. The company wants to create a separate news tab that will live outside of the site's main feed. The New York Times reports that although most of the articles featured in the news tab will be generated by algorithms, Facebook is also looking to hire a small team of veteran journalists to select stories. This isn't Facebook's first attempt to rely on human curators for sorting their news. The company also tried hiring a team of contractors to aid in news gathering, but then faced allegations that the contractors were routinely suppressing news from conservative publications. This time around, not only will Facebook hire full-time employees rather than relying on contractors, but the company has said it's willing to pay select publishers millions in order to feature their stories. Here's why you should care. Facebook has received a lot of flack in the past for the way it handles news, especially when the algorithm it uses for curating news actively promoted false and misleading stories. Like that time in 2016, when a fake news story about then Fox News commentator Megyn Kelly's supposed secret affinity for Hillary Clinton erupted on Facebook. But is hiring veteran journalists any better? One can argue that algorithms are flawed, but at the same time, many Americans are distrustful of the news media already. We'll see how Americans react to the new initiative as it's set to begin the testing phase this fall.
Thanks for watching Hill TV on YouTube. Be sure to click subscribe and hit the bell so you know when we post new videos. And head to thehill.com for all the latest political news.